Well, my name's Murray Bott. I'm currently New Zealand Director for the American-based Mutual UFO Network. My first awareness of the UFO flying saucer phenomenon as a straw boy in 1959, my parents took me to a public lecture by George Adamski, who was then touring through New Zealand. I didn't follow much of an interest in the subject till the early 1970s, when my main interest focused on the ancient astronauts question, after having read books by Eric von Däniken and then intensely buying books and reading on that subject for that time. I guess I was a little bit disillusioned with some of the answers Eric von Däniken gave me and drifted slowly into the UFO field. By 1983, I'd met some other people and we formed a small group here in Auckland called the Auckland UFO Research Association, and we held public meetings for a while. I joined MUFON after the death of Harold Fulton in 1986. I was appointed New Zealand Director for MUFON. It was later that year that I was given many of his records by his wife, which I now hold in part of my archives. I've since been given some material by other people and hold perhaps one of the two or three largest archives of UFO material in New Zealand-based material. Possibly even for overseas material, is probably not that quantity of stuff in any one collection anywhere in New Zealand, other than a group that was formed in Timaru. One night we were doing a skywatch with some friends and I saw one very distant nocturnal light. It was unexplained, but I wouldn't call it finally that it was a UFO, and a very distant star-like in size, just a light that behaved in an unusual manner. It stood out. It was star-like in size and appearance, but it was moving. So it was the only time I've ever seen anything that couldn't be explained, but I couldn't categorise it as a UFO either.
Do you find, is it a bit disappointing that you're picking up all these reports and processing the sightings that you actually haven't seen one yourself?
It doesn't really perturb me on that alone, but I do feel over 50 years of people reporting strange lights in the sky, and in some cases there are still strange lights in the sky that are unexplained, that can't be verified to be either. Simply can't be verified as anything, and will always be unverified as unknowns. Harold Fulton was considered or treated by many to be one of the leading and foremost experts on the subject. He had taken interest in UFOs, I believe, from the wartime, certainly in the late 40s. They'd heard reports of the Foo Fighters and other things during the war.
During the Second World War, the term Foo Fighter became a catch-all phrase for fast-moving, erratically flying objects. Foo Fighters were reported on many occasions around the world, and not just by pilots flying missions. In September 1941, in the Indian Ocean, a Foo Fighter was seen from the deck of the SS Pulaski. In the summer of 1942, a Royal Australian Air Force plane patrolling off the Tasman Peninsula was buzzed by a Foo Fighter, and several UK Ministry of Defence documents declassified in the 1990s reveal sightings of unusual aircraft by RAF crews. One is dated December 3, 1942, and shows that air crews spotted strange craft travelling at an estimated 500 miles an hour.
They decided they'd form a group, and because they're Air Force people, they call themselves Civilian Saucer Investigations, or for short CSI NZ, and they had formed in 1952, then started holding public meetings. That group became one of the focal points in New Zealand for a lot of reports, and they published a regional magazine called Flying Saucers, later named Space Probe, one group organised in the North Island by the Hinfars in Henderson, the other group organised by the Ditchisons in Timaru, and they become the Dempsey correspondence groups, each finally publishing their own newsletter. But then the Ditchisons group finally broke from the Dempsey philosophy, citing the photos as fake. But the two separate groups continued to be independent of each other and publish their own newsletters and publish reports and so on. By the time the 70s and 80s came about, there were other groups forming. In the 70s there was another group that became prominent called the Earth Colonisation Research Association, which focused on the ancient astronaut idea. Other groups came and went. The most enduring one was the Taran UFO Investigation Group. They had started as part of the Dempsey Correspondence Group in the late 50s and still exists today, held in monthly meetings. The Moreland sighting of 1959, there was Mrs. Eileen Moreland. Her husband was Fred Moreland, and he worked at the Lenham, the local Air Force base. I believe he was a security officer. Was another significant feature in as much as one of the few close encounter cases where a craft was seen by the witness, although a sole witness was seen by a witness with apparently two occupants in it. One was sitting there and the other stood up, leaned over his shoulder and sat down again. She did not see their faces at all, so there's very limited description. That hovered above a paddock near her as she gone out to bring the cows in for milking, and this craft came down and hovered above some trees. There were two rows of lights around the room that seemed to go round. When it took off, they went round in opposite circles and made a whining noise, and then flew away, and she suffered what appeared to be radiation burns later. That is a prominent case, which is one of the few close encounter the third cases that are existing out here in New Zealand. I guess it was a rarity for the 1950s and is still one of the prominent cases. Late 70s there seemed to be a UFO wave or a UFO flap around the Waimata Valley area, just north of Gisborne. There was a case which was later to report as a possible UFO abduction of three ladies, all of whom now I believe live in Australia. One of the ladies concerned still maintains to this day she was abducted, but that was just one. There's also a burnt circle reported there. Another researcher, UFO researcher, claimed to have seen a craft himself during those few months. And the three witnesses turned up at the Taran UFO convention in March 1978 to tell their story, and from the UFO researchers got to hear their story, and I believe one of the people who prominently investigated that case was Brian Ditchison of the Timaru-based scientific approach to cosmic understanding. He's now a UFO researcher in Australia. On about the 21st of December, two pilots reported seeing lights seemingly around or following the aircraft, and that was reported in the media for a bit. And then there was a New Zealander, Quentin Fogarty, who was a television reporter who worked for them, an Australian TV channel, but was on holiday in New Zealand, so they asked him to grab a camera crew and go down and film up and down the coast from one of these aircraft just as background for this 21st of December sighting. And the remarkable thing was that it happened on that flight was that these lights started appearing and they were able to film them at the same time as the aircraft controllers using the radar were able to track objects on their screen simultaneously with the reports of these lights being seen from the aircraft. Because of the nature of his camera and the lenses, he was seeing a different image than what the witness was seeing, but the pilot and the co-pilot were seeing these lights, and also the film crews, the sound recorders, and reporter were seeing these lights.
What did the cameraman see?
Various sized lights down to apparently large sized object, filling his lens. Some of the larger images seemed a fairly large sort of blob of light, so to speak, down to just the first parts of the filming, a small tiny light in the sky. The film was taken over to America to be viewed by an optical physicist who worked within the US Navy, and that optical physicist was Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who was also a UFO researcher. He declared the film genuine and wrote extensively about it, although that film has become, if you look at it deeply, become a little bit controversial, in as much as some suggest that lights could be anything. Various people try to attribute it to squid boat lights, which, from the witness accounts from the aircraft, and that is unlikely to be squid boat lights. When the aircraft turned around and went towards the lights seemed to go past them, and they felt was then behind them. I guess it became world known because of the television footage, and it reached everywhere within days. It was seen on television everywhere. You generally dismiss most of the current attempts to explain them, but you can equally not count it being anything extraterrestrial. It's just a light in the sky.
Over the years, there's been different sightings of different types of alien beings. So there used to be the Nordics with the long blonde hair, and then the Greys, and then there's been other reports of different descriptions. What do you attribute that to?
For those who would accept the witness accounts, do suggest there are many races of beings coming here, but of course you then have to enter your own debate. For each individual would have to decide whether they accept those reports as reality or just treat them as an unsubstantiated report. So I would have to, it'd be to me just conjecture, just purely conjecture as to guess why. In some cases, like the Billy Meier cases, that all accounts as photographs have been analysed and do appear to be fakes. So, but there's still people there who almost rigorously say they're not fakes, his account is real. So it gets down to what the individual the personal standing of each individual as to what they accept as being real or not.
We bring you this special radio television broadcast in order to give you the very latest information on an amazing phenomenon. the arrival of a spaceship.
Remember that Ronald Reagan gave a speech, I think, to the United Nations, where he said we would all come together if we knew of an alien threat, and all our differences among nations would disappear.
Yeah.
Suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries. I couldn't help at one point in my discussions privately with General Secretary Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children wherever we may live in the world, I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
My understanding has been that he did have a vague interest in the subject of UFOs, etc. That influenced his line of thinking to some extent. If this threat did materialise, that all nations would join together.
Aliens are a threat, or are they here to help?
You hear conflicting stories. There's been no overt attempt to do us any harm. Individual stories will tell horror stories about how they were treated during some of the abduction cases. But there's been no overt attempt like we're being invaded by armed forces or anything like that. There's been no overt hostile action taken. Any good intent or bad intent has only been reported by individuals, some saying they're peace-loving creatures here to help us, and some saying individually that they're here to harm us, they want to make use of us, they want to take us over. But on the face of it, there's been no overt action that we can see visually that there's any threat from them. But so often in abduction cases, for example, it's one person claiming to have been abducted while their partner in the bed beside them had never noticed a thing. So again, where do you stand in a report? That's the kind of situation we've got to face. A lot of people have a line of thinking of say, absolute belief in abductions, but many do not. I couldn't really say what I would say, because if you send a message out there, it's really all started to be initially as to, hello, how are you? Kind of come and talk to me sort of approach, and then the initial contact would just be like an introductory one. You should talk to them scientifically and say, what's what scientifically? You can talk to them real friendly and say, come have a cup of tea with us. I really don't know what. I think probably there'll be a certain amount of both scientific and ethical interest if there's ever any contact made. And any messages we should send out, I feel, was obviously have to be initially an introduction and get an exchange to get to know who each other are. Historically, several circle cases in the 1960s, and the most prominent one being the Natia circle, but they are not crop circles, they are various kinds of circles, rings or flattened, or in the case of the Natia circle, they're more bleached scrub, bleached manuka, and apparently dead manuka, dead or dying manuka, and other scrub, and there's one near Teakwiti at a place to, the name was, I don't know whether it's Pretty Titi was just the name of the property or the district, but it was some flattened reeds in a pond near Teakwiti, and that was in 1969, and the farmer reported that occurred on his farm 3 times. Really, it was only a third time that he later claimed he saw a UFO near his property, not in the vicinity of the circle, but somewhere near his property, within a couple of days of his supposed third circle case. All the photos indicate there was, from the central point, flattened outwards like the spokes of a wheel. No swirls, just flattened horizontally. And I'm not sure whether anybody has done any research on whether that occurs naturally or not. That's an unknown question, but that case could have natural explanations for that, just for that part of the phenomenon.